Okay, another Monday lecture begins. A famous quote that Abraham Lincoln said when addressing the politicians in Washington City, they used to call it, now Washington, D.C., was a house divided cannot stand. So we talked about the background to why the Civil War happened. Most of it was sort of developing over a long period of time, and eventually there was going to be some form of conflict. At first it was political, and then it became military. And the southern states decided that they would rather separate from the United States and create their own country rather than risk losing the slave society, which their economy depended on, and they believed was essential to their state's ability to operate. Slavery is the main issue of the war. There's no question about it. It's just a little bit more complicated than just the South were all slaveholders and they were racist, and the North were not. There was plenty of people in the North that supported the slave societies of the South. There were people like Abraham Lincoln who ideally would have pushed for free states all over America, but for the majority of Americans, really the free states just wanted no more expansion by the slavery states. Those slave states thought if they did not expand, eventually they were going to they were going to lose their power, their influence, and maybe they were right about that, but that was kind of the point, that there was a contradiction in creating a country that was supposed to be based on freedom and equality, and then mistreating the slaves of different races, but primarily West African peoples, various tribes. And then, of course, on Thursday we have to talk about the last part of the chapter, which is what happened to all the people that lived there before, which is on the same level of damage or cultural and ethnic sort of damage as what happened to the people who were enslaved. Just in many cases there was less of an intentional destruction of their society, whereas when it came to the slave trade, it was purely for profit. The diseases that spread amongst the native people often weren't directly caused by the Europeans. It was accidental in most cases. Although in certain cases there are accusations that they were intentionally exposing native people to diseases. So if that's the case, I mean, on the quiz, we talked about it being a crime against humanity. Certainly, I suggest with Christopher Columbus that he's also guilty of this sort of crime against humanity in general, for the way that he treats native people, and as a consequence, Arawaks are extinct. On page 162 in your textbook, which I'm holding here in front of me, it gives you a sort of general overview of what I've broken down on the board. I've got, so the Union decides, it's in the early 1860s, but we'll just say 1860s, right? 1860 to 1865. But right in the middle of the century, when America sort of goes through is sort of almost like an existential crisis, you would say. In the middle of the 17th century, it was a conflict with the natives, where they almost got wiped out. In the middle of the 18th century, it was the 7 Years' War, and then the Revolutionary War. In the middle of the 19th century, the crisis, the major cultural and national divide is the American Civil War, and in the middle of the 20th century, of course, is World War II. So I've divided things in from top to bottom here: North, South, Union, Confederacy. The Union is blue, Confederacy is gray. They're largely in the South, and they both have a lot of territory, but there's more people in the Union. Okay, so this is one advantage, which I should definitely include up here. So, for the most part, there's no Western African, soon to become African Americans and free people. They can't fight. In fact, a certain amount of people need to still manage the slaves, and the proportion of people in the South is there's millions of slaves, and they frequently try to organize rebellions, and they try to escape, and they try to attack their masters in order to be free. And so you need a certain amount of, power and presence and authority to manage the states, in addition to raising an army. So which the North doesn't have to worry about. They're recruiting people and then conscripting. The population is bigger, and anybody in the population can participate. And towards the end of the war, they start adding African American freed slaves, freedmen they would call them, free men, into their army, but in separate units. And that's a characteristic in the North that indicates that these people are not really doing this for moral reasons. A lot of them are just fighting over this economic, political, reality that is different culture has developed in the South. Now they work together because, of course, the industry in the North that's developing needs raw materials, and the slave labor in the South provides a lot of those materials. In particular, what they used to refer to as king cotton, because cotton was the driving resource. We will talk about the Industrial Revolution after we get past chapter 5. But the British are going to invent ways to make cotton fast and cheaply, and America is going to provide that cotton for hundreds of years, and that's going to make both America and the British rich. The way that they keep the labor costs down is by having slaves work the plantations and paying nothing except for the necessities to keep the slaves healthy enough to do their work, right? So we've talked about the slavery stuff already. It's passed in chapter 4. The outcome is that the North wins. The South is defeated by a general called Ulysses S. Grant, who sort of looks like me, I would say, generally, just sort of bearded guy, about the same size as me in height. He's older than me, but he's the general, the main general, and Tecumseh Sherman, who I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the Sherman tank that the Americans used in World War II, but it's named after him. He was the second in command, another general, but the supreme commander of the Union Army was Ulysses S. Grant at the end. Jefferson Davis was the president of this new country they called the Confederacy. So when you see that sort of splashed flag that looks somewhat like a Union Jack in a sense, that flag is symbolic of the slave states of the South, and when they were a separate country for 4.5 years, they fought battles. Like I said, gray. These guys were gray uniforms, blue uniforms. They fought each other, and they had battles that were way, way bloodier, way worse than anything that had ever happened until, Napoleon's battles in Europe, where millions of people died. It's a similar sort of modernizing warfare, cannonballs. I showed you the video of the Revolutionary War. Civil War is worse. They're improving their ability to make war. They're even, you need to this. The North is also wealthier. It has more resources. It has a more developed railroad. They have They have better equipment. They get fed better. This is about the time when they start, putting meat in tin cans, like fish and things, and sealing them so that the food can be used, 3 months later, and you can open it up with your jackknife, and then you can eat, and so you can continue fighting. You can't fight if you don't sleep and you don't eat. So the equipment, the bigger population, basically in any war that's not quick, any extended war, multi-year wars, whoever has the economic power and the resources eventually wins. I have no idea what's going to happen with Ukraine and Russia, but right now that's what it's become. The war is continuing until one side runs out of stuff. Once they don't have any equipment, they don't have any bullets, guns, boots, food, tanks, cannons, trucks, they can't keep fighting anymore. You need those resources. You need fuel, etc. The North had more of this stuff than the South. Robert E. Lee has been called one of the best American generals. We don't talk about him very much because he was pro-slavery, and most of us think that owning slaves and fighting for slavery is ethically wrong. But that's the side he was on, and he was a brilliant general. It took the North years in order to defeat him because he was so talented, so intelligent, so strategically and tactically he was a really, really effective general. So once his army started to lose, he was the one who surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant in a farmhouse, believe it or not. It was where he finally sat down and asked for food and ceasefire so that they could end the war. This is what it says on page 162. I just happened, when I was writing this book, to come across some experts, so-called experts anyway, American university professors who were asked to, there were various experts, not just professors. Some of them were professional historians, or some of them were, documentary people, more along the lines of filmmaking and television producers. But they asked these people to describe in one word what the Civil War meant. And this is just a few of the words they said. Freedom, which sounds very positive. Bloody, not so great. Heroic. Fortunate. Okay, that's complicated. Unintended. So it was accidental. One of them said unfinished, right? And that's because afterwards the slaves get freed, but part of the problem is the slave population is freed, and then they don't have any property, they don't have any money. They were slaves. So there's a huge problem. Abraham Lincoln, right at the end of the war, gets assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. You may know the story. He was at an opera, and the guy walked up behind him and shot him and killed him. and then jumped off the balcony, broke his leg, and then ran out of the theater. They hunted him down and found him in a farmhouse, and then they shot him. So we never really knew entirely what his motivations were, but he did have an obsession with killing Abraham Lincoln. He thought it was sort of his destiny. He was a Shakespeare actor. Go figure. Shakespeare is my favorite writer and my specialty, but I'm not sure how his acting career was developing. He must have been a decent actor, is what I'm saying. Because he was a Shakespeare trained actor. Usually you have to be pretty good, in order to, earn a living doing Shakespeare. But anyway, he assassinated Lincoln, then he himself was killed, and the president who replaced Lincoln, and I'm not going to make you memorize him, but his name was Andrew Johnson, and he was one of those people in the North who sympathized with the slave states and didn't like African Americans. There's lots of racism, despite the fact that there's no more slavery. Racism continued, and what he did basically is block all the legislation that was trying to reform, to provide some assistance or land or, relocation of slaves in the South and trying to protect their rights. Like, for example, they were given the right to vote, but then there started to be, harassment and violence and protesting by racist, the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, those people, Americans who dressed up with a white sheet over them and put burning crosses down. They tried to intimidate people. They killed people. They hung people to threaten them not to vote and to keep them, to keep white people and black people separate. So ultimately, when somebody says unfinished, that means that it took another 100 years for Martin Luther King Jr., to be killed ultimately, and for the American government to recognize that segregation, the separation of black people and white people, was also unconstitutional, just like slavery is, right? So black people were at a disadvantage when they were slaves. They got their freedom, but their freedom meant still they had to survive. They had to work. They were always paid less. They were treated worse. They had to go to different bathrooms. They had to go to different restaurants. They had to sit on a train in a different spot. Certainly, you've probably heard of Rosa Parks. Usually we talk about her as we grow up as a person who sticks up for civil rights, refuses to sit at the back of the bus. That's the way it was. Even though Abraham Lincoln made the Emancipation Proclamation, he was unable, partly because he was killed shortly before the war ended, around the time the war ended, which made him unable to do anything further. And the black population couldn't really be integrated in the South, and the soldiers withdrew. So that process, post-Civil War, Andrew Johnson blocking laws that would have benefited the free people that didn't have any money or resources, happens. And then they're trying to rebuild the South and get rid of all of these people, institutions, politicians who were slave supporters. They're reorganizing, reconstructing. The South gets very badly damaged infrastructure-wise. So it's still the case that the South and the center of the United States have the poorest states. It's partly because of the type of land that was there, but it's partly the inheritance of this, ultimately the economic, engine that the North becomes. Their economy explodes, and produces all this war material, and the South collapses, and their entire system for growing their economy breaks down. So there's still a divide there. There's a racial divide, and it's not supposed to be a house divided, remember? That's a political thing, but there's so much division in American society. Diversity can be a very positive thing, all these different people and all these different states and all these different situations, but ultimately these divisions, they can be used, right? Politically, they can be used to control people and to make people fight each other. We're seeing right now leadership in the United States that they like division. They don't want to work with other parts of government. They want to change everything, and they don't want to work with universities. They don't want to work with they don't want to work with the justice system. They don't want to work with the bureaucracy. They're trying to destroy it and create some sort of authoritarian structure where the president can just immediately do things without the democratic process that has been in use consistently since George Washington became the first president. So ultimately what happens is some of these guys in the North, you will know some of them, Rockefeller, Carnegie, right? They're the beneficiaries when they build railroads all over America. Carnegie sells all his steel to the railroad companies, and he starts buying railroads. He owns all the steel mills. He has the biggest steel company in the world. It's based in Pittsburgh. That's why it's called Steel Town. And Carnegie, once the railroads are all built, he starts making skyscrapers out of steel. So he became one of the richest people in the world. He spent a lot of money on himself, and he was very hard on his workers. We have to talk about this, I think, as we move forward into the 20th century, because there's more, labor conflict in the 20th century than in the 19th century. But basically, factory workers are being overworked and underpaid, and they're trying to make unions, and they're trying to resist. Carnegie was famous for breaking strikes with police officers or militia or National Guard, or by hiring basically gangsters to go in there and make people go back to work. In the end, he built like 1,000 libraries, made donations, founded universities, very amazingly enormous amounts of money given to education, because he used to study when he was young at a library. He was Scottish. His father was a blue-collar worker who was unsuccessful in Scotland, and he immigrated to America, and then he became, just this incredibly wealthy Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos type person. But in the end, he did give all his money away, mostly to educational facilities, which I do respect that result. Rockefeller was the same, just got so unbelievably rich that he was out of control. They had to break up his companies and everything, and he still had so much money he didn't know what to do with it. He gave 90% of it away, maybe 99% of it away. His kids still had tons of money, certainly enough to be comfortable and pursue their own interests for their entire life. So this is why it's called the Gilded Age, right? Because I think I'm spelling this wrong. That looks like there's not supposed to be a U there. Fix that. To gild something is to cover it in gold. So it looks like it's gold, but really, if you scratch the surface of it, underneath it, it's a base metal like iron or tungsten or lead. So looks like gold on the outside, but inside it's a lot less valuable. That's what they called this period of super rich people and super poor people. You know, the factory workers weren't getting rich. Henry Ford, the Vanderbilts, the Duke family, which is tobacco industry. Stanford, the university is named after one of these guys. So, I mean, they did these projects as they aged, and they became so wealthy that they thought they needed to give something back. But the fact remains that the majority of their life, they were cutthroat businessmen, you know, pursuing mass wealth at the expense of, you know, sometimes millions of people's poor condition. So underneath the gold, underneath those super rich men, just like America now, which is super rich, they're taking rocket trips to the moon, not to the moon, but to space, soon the moon, for fun. Well, the economy is falling apart and normal people are suffering. They're going for space rides in their spare time. Similar situation. The frontier we'll discuss in next class. The frontier is the edge, the western edge of America that keeps going farther and farther. They keep pushing the native people farther and farther, saying, okay, go to the Mississippi, okay, go to the other side of the Mississippi, and okay, go across the plains, and like, okay, go north, you know, but eventually they get to the ocean, and there's no more edge. The Northwest Territory gets taken over, Oregon Territory and Washington, Montana, they get turned into states, and all of that native land that was supposed to be given to them by treaty is occupied. So there's no edge anymore. They've spread across the entire continent, and that would be so in the 1890s. That's what they say. The frontier is closed. Edge of America has been achieved. We've expanded across the entire thing. That's why from sea to shining sea, that is the motto of Canada, and the Americans used a similar one as an objective to unify the continent. They thought it was their manifest destiny to make their way across. So on Thursday, we'll continue right there, finish off chapter 5, and see if we can start a little bit of chapter 6, because of course imperialism has a lot to do with the way Europeans behaved towards the natives and the way they behaved towards the slaves that they used to do their labor in the South as well. Okay, thank you. I know this weekend you have MT and we have no quiz this Thursday, so just make sure you finish your assignment. Do your best on that. The assignment doesn't have to be on context, okay? The rules are the same, essentially, except for I'm looking for analysis and description. You don't have to do social context, or if you feel like that's useful, that's up to you. But what I'm looking for is find a contradiction, tell me how it works, analyze it, describe it, and then tell me what it means, right? What's it affect? What's it affecting people, or what is its effect, negative or positive? Is it just a matter of diversity and the contradiction works? I mean, it doesn't have to be negative. It can be something that is a feature of American culture that somehow they've managed to figure out the contradictions so that seems like a contradiction, but it works anyway. Okay? So put some thought into it and get it done by Wednesday night, and we'll have class on Thursday, and then many of you will disappear on Friday. I think that's what I heard. So see you on Thursday. Thank you for listening.